The polished concrete floor of Westbrook Manufacturing felt cold and unforgiving beneath Robert Miller's worn work boots. The industrial facility hummed with mechanical precision around him, the familiar sense of machine oil and hot metal hanging in the air, smells that had permeated his clothes and skin for the past 12 years. But today, those familiar sensations were undercut by something else, a gnawing anxiety that tightened his chest and made his collar feel too restrictive. "Daddy, are those the big machines you fix?" Sophie's small voice pulled him from his thoughts. Her tiny hand was warm in his, 8 years old and full of wonder, as she gazed up at the towering equipment. Rob looked down at his daughter, her dark hair neatly arranged in two braids, each topped with a purple bow that matched her favorite sweater. The pride in her eyes made his heart swell and ache simultaneously. "Some of them, sweetie," he answered, forcing a smile. "I help make sure everything runs smoothly." Today was Family Day at Westbrook, an annual corporate affair meant to boost morale, a transparent gesture that felt more obligatory than celebratory. But Sophie had been counting down the days, eager to see where her father disappeared to every morning. For her, this was an adventure. For Rob, it was walking a tightrope over a pit of uncertainty. The factory had been struggling for months. Rumors of buyouts and layoffs slithered through the break room conversations like toxic smoke. After serving 8 years in the Army, Westbrook had been Rob's lifeline when he'd returned to Michigan. When Karen got sick 3 years ago, the steady paycheck and health insurance had been crucial. After her death, the routine of the factory floor had kept him sane, given structure to the shattered pieces of his life. Now, that stability was threatening to crumble beneath his feet. "Mr. Miller," a cheerful voice called out. Denise from HR approached with a clipboard, her smile professional and practiced. "So glad you could bring your daughter today. Here are your visitor badges." Sophie beamed as Denise handed her a shiny plastic badge with her name printed in large letters. She immediately pinned it to her sweater with solemn importance. "Thanks, Denise," Rob said, accepting his own badge. "Any word on the new ownership situation?" Denise's smile flickered momentarily. "Nothing official yet, but I'm sure Mr. Blackwood will address any updates during his presentation." As she moved on to the next family, Rob felt Sophie tugging at his hand. "Who's going to own your factory?" "Daddy," she asked, her brow furrowed with a child's curiosity. "It's complicated, sweetheart," he replied, guiding her toward the tour gathering area. "Big companies sometimes buy other companies, but don't worry about that today. Let's just have fun, okay?" As they joined the growing crowd of employees and their families, Rob noticed a woman standing near the far wall. Unlike the other executives in their stiff business attire, she wore a simple gray cashmere coat over a cream-colored blouse and tailored black pants. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried no clipboard or phone, just stood with quiet attention. Observing the families as they gathered, there was something distinct about her stillness amid the growing chaos of excited children and nervous employees. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Rob was struck by the intensity of her gaze, not judgmental or pitying, but deeply perceptive, as though she were cataloging every detail of the scene before her. He looked away quickly, focusing instead on adjusting Sophie's visitor badge. Whoever the woman was, she clearly belonged to the executive world, a world that had become increasingly hostile to people like him. "All right, everyone," Trevor Blackwood's voice boomed through the gathering area. The plant manager stood on a small platform, his expensive suit immaculate, his silver hair perfectly styled. "Welcome to Westbrook Manufacturing's annual Family Day. We're delighted to have you join us to see the important work your loved ones do here." Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. At 55, he'd climbed the corporate ladder through political maneuvering rather than technical knowledge. He spoke in rehearsed sound bites about team synergy and operational excellence, while knowing precious little about the actual operations he managed. "Today, we'll be touring our production facility, including our newly upgraded assembly line," Blackwood continued. "Please stay with your guide, keep children close, and remember that safety is our #1 priority." Rob suppressed a scoff. If safety were truly the priority, the company would have addressed the faulty emergency shutoff switches he'd reported 3 months ago. The tour began, A winding procession through the sprawling facility. Rob lifted Sophie onto his shoulders so she could see better, her small hands resting on his head as she gasped at the massive equipment. "This is where we stamp the metal panels," Rob explained as they passed the press line. "Those big machines can apply tons of pressure to shape steel into the parts we need." "Is it loud when they're working?" Sophie asked, leaning down to speak into his ear. "Very loud," Rob confirmed. "That's why we wear ear protection. But they've turned down the volume for visitors today." As they continued through the factory, Rob felt a small swell of pride seeing the operation through Sophie's eyes. The complex choreography of machines and people working in harmony was something he'd taken for granted. Now, seeing her wonder at the scale of it all, he remembered why he'd initially loved this work, the tangible satisfaction of building something real. The tour reached the centerpiece of the facility, the new automated assembly line. It was supposed to be Westbrook's competitive edge, a multi-million-dollar investment in cutting-edge robotics, but the implementation had been rushed and plagued with problems. The system frequently malfunctioned, creating production bottlenecks and safety concerns that management consistently downplayed. This state-of-the-art robotic system represents Westbrook's commitment to innovation and efficiency, Blackwood announced, gesturing grandly toward the line. "With this technology, we're positioning ourselves at the forefront of American manufacturing excellence." As if on cue, a harsh grinding sound emanated from the main assembly robot. The conveyor belt shuddered and came to an abrupt halt. A warning light began flashing red. Blackwood's smile tightened. "Just a minor adjustment needed," he said through clenched teeth. Pressing his radio to call for technical support, Rob recognized the problem immediately. The alignment sensor was malfunctioning again. The same issue he'd flagged in 3 separate maintenance reports. The technicians who rushed to the control panel looked panicked, clearly out of their depth with the new system. "Sweetie, hold my coffee for a minute," Rob said, lifting Sophie down from his shoulders and handing her his paper cup. "Daddy needs to check something." Without waiting for permission, Rob ducked under the safety line and approached the control panel. The younger technicians stepped aside, relief evident on their faces as they recognized him. "Sensor misalignment," Rob muttered, his fingers moving deftly over the controls. "Systems rejecting the calibration because the primary and secondary readings are out of sync." In less than 2 minutes, he had bypassed the faulty sensor, recalibrated the system, and reset the assembly sequence. The warning light stopped flashing, and the conveyor belt hummed back to life. The workers nearby nodded appreciatively. Rob stepped back, ready to return to Sophie, when Blackwood's voice cut through the mechanical noise like a knife. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Miller!" The plant manager's face was flushed with anger as he strode toward Rob. Abandoning his tour guide persona, the entire group had gone silent, all eyes fixed on the confrontation. "The line was down. I fixed it," Rob replied evenly, already sensing the dangerous shift in the atmosphere. "You violated explicit safety protocols," Blackwood hissed. "You bypassed authorized channels and undermined the entire management structure." "It was a simple calibration issue," Rob explained, keeping his voice calm. "The same one I documented in my reports last month." "From reports?" Blackwood's voice rose. "You think filing reports gives you authority to interfere with a multi-million-dollar system? This is exactly the kind of cowboy behavior the new ownership will not tolerate." The mention of new ownership sent a murmur through the watching crowd. Rob felt a cold weight settling in his stomach as he realized what was happening. Blackwood was making an example of him, a public display of authority, during a transitional period when executives were desperate to prove their value. "Mr. Blackwood," Rob began, "I've been maintaining these systems for—" "Not anymore." Blackwood cut him off, his voice ringing with finality. "Consider this your official termination, effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. Your access credentials are revoked." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Rob stood frozen, the blood draining from his face as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Fired. In front of everyone, in front of Sophie. His eyes found his daughter in the crowd. She stood clutching his coffee cup, her small face contorted with confusion and the beginning of tears. The sight of her distress broke through his shock. "You're firing me for fixing your machine," he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm firing you for insubordination and safety violations," Blackwood replied coldly. "This incident is merely the final straw in a pattern of disregard for proper protocols." Rob clenched his jaw, restraining the torrent of words threatening to spill out. Arguing would only make this spectacle worse for Sophie. He glanced around at his coworkers, seeing a mixture of shock, sympathy, and the careful blank expressions of people terrified they might be next. And then he saw her again, the woman in the gray coat. She had moved closer, her expression no longer neutral, but filled with a cold, calculating intensity directed not at Rob, but at Blackwood. Her gaze was analytical, assessing, as though she were making mental notes of every word and reaction. Security approached. Two men Rob had greeted every morning for years now avoiding his eyes as they prepared to escort him out like a criminal. "I know the way out," Rob said quietly, brushing past them to reach Sophie. He crouched down to her level, his heart breaking at the confusion and fear in her eyes. "Hey, Ladybug," he whispered, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Looks like we need to go now. Why is that man mad at you?" "Daddy?" she asked, her lower lip trembling. "Did you do something wrong?" Rob swallowed hard. "No, sweetie. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about the right way to do things. We're going to be okay." He lifted her into his arms, her small body trembling against his chest. The shame and rage burned in his throat as he carried her past the staring crowd, past Blackwood's smug expression, past 12 years of dedicated service reduced to a humiliating public dismissal. As they approached the exit, Rob felt a gaze upon him and turned to find the woman in the gray coat watching him leave. There was something in her expression, not pity, but a focused intensity that felt like recognition. For a fleeting moment, she gave him a barely perceptible nod, as though confirming something to herself. Then the door closed behind them, and Rob stepped out into the cold Michigan afternoon, unemployed and humiliated, with a frightened child in his arms and no idea what would come next. The drive home passed in a blur of suppressed emotion. Rob focused on reassuring Sophie, answering her confused questions with gentle half-truths. Yes, he wouldn't be going to work tomorrow. No, Mr. Blackwood wasn't a bad person, just someone who made a mistake. Yes, they would still be able to have dinner and read stories tonight. Each reassurance felt hollow in his mouth. The reality of their situation pressed down on him with suffocating weight. As a single father with limited savings, losing his job wasn't just an inconvenience, it was catastrophic. The mortgage, Sophie's school expenses, the medical bills that still lingered from Karen's illness. The mental calculations made his head swim. As they pulled into the driveway of their modest two-bedroom house, Rob took a deep breath, pushing down the panic threatening to overwhelm him. He needed to be strong for Sophie. "How about grilled cheese for lunch?" he asked with forced cheerfulness as they entered the house. Sophie nodded, still subdued. "Can we have tomato soup too?" "Absolutely," Rob replied, grateful for the simple task to occupy his hands and mind as he prepared their lunch, cutting Sophie's sandwich into the triangles she preferred and making sure the soup wasn't too hot. Rob's thoughts raced through options. He could call his army buddy Mike, who worked at the auto plant in Lansing. There might be openings there, though the commute would be brutal, or maybe the community college would need instructors for their technical program. The pay would be less, but the hours might be better for Sophie's schedule. They ate lunch at the kitchen table, Sophie gradually returning to her usual chatter as the immediate distress of the morning faded. After lunch, Rob suggested she take a nap, an old ritual from when she was younger that she'd mostly outgrown, but today she didn't protest. The morning's events had exhausted her emotionally. Once Sophie was tucked in, Rob sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, a notepad, and a growing sense of dread. He created a spreadsheet of their finances, mapping out how long they could survive on his savings. The numbers were grim. 2 months, maybe 3 if they cut every non-essential expense. He began searching job listings, sending his resume to anything remotely matching his qualifications. Each application felt like a Hail Mary pass into a void of uncertainty. The manufacturing sector in their region had been contracting for years, with skilled positions increasingly rare. By evening, Rob had submitted 15 applications and made 5 networking calls, putting aside his pride to let people know he was looking for work. The responses were uniformly sympathetic but non-committal. The job market was tight. Everyone would keep an ear out for opportunities. After dinner and Sophie's bedtime routine, Rob sat alone in the living room, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood. He held a glass of bourbon, allowing himself this one small indulgence as the facade of optimism he'd maintained for Sophie finally crumbled. 12 years. 12 years of never missing a shift, of solving problems others couldn't, of training younger workers and improving systems, all ended in a moment of public humiliation by a man who cared more about appearances than actual competence. The unfairness of it burned in his chest. He'd survived 2 tours in Iraq, lost his wife to cancer, rebuilt a life for his daughter from the ashes of grief, only to have his livelihood stripped away on the whim of a corporate climber. A soft knock at the door startled him from his bitter reflections. He glanced at the clock, 8:45 p.m. Too late for casual visitors. Setting down his glass, Rob approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, he saw a woman standing on his porch, her posture straight, her expression composed. It took him a moment to recognize her without the gray coat, but when he did, his breath caught. The woman from the factory, the observer. He hesitated, confusion and suspicion warring within him. Why would she be at his house? How did she even know where he lived? Another gentle knock prompted him to open the door, curiosity overcoming caution. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice low and measured. "I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Catherine Hayes. I was hoping we might speak." Up close. She was striking in an understated way. Mid-30s, with intelligent eyes that studied him with the same analytical intensity he'd noticed at the factory. She wore a simple black blazer over a white blouse, professional but not ostentatious. "How did you find my address?" Rob asked, not bothering to hide his suspicion. "Your employee file," she replied without hesitation. "Again, I apologize for the invasion of privacy, but what I have to discuss couldn't wait." Rob's grip tightened on the doorframe. "If you're from HR with severance paperwork, you could have called." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I'm not from HR. Mr. Miller, may I come in? I promise to be brief." Every instinct told Rob to close the door and end whatever this was. But something in her direct gaze held him in place, a seriousness that suggested whatever she had to say might actually matter. "5 minutes," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. Catherine Hayes walked into his living room with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to entering unfamiliar spaces. She didn't look around judgmentally at the modest furnishings or the scattered evidence of single fatherhood Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator. The basket of unfolded laundry on the couch, the collection of well-worn children's books on the coffee table. "Please, sit," Rob offered, gesturing to the armchair while he took a seat on the couch. "Now, what's this about?" Catherine sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap. "I'll be direct. Mr. Miller, what happened to you today was unjust and counterproductive." Rob's eyebrows rose. "You're not wrong. But why do you care?" "Because I was there to evaluate the operational culture of Westbrook Manufacturing, and what I witnessed was deeply troubling," she replied. "A skilled employee was publicly terminated for solving a problem that management had neglected, creating unnecessary downtime and potential safety issues." "Evaluation," Rob repeated, his suspicion deepening. "Who exactly are you, Ms. Hayes?" She held his gaze steadily. "I represent the new ownership of Westbrook. We've been conducting discrete assessments of the facility's operations, management, and workforce before formally announcing the acquisition." Rob leaned back, processing this information. "So you're what a consultant, an efficiency expert here to determine who stays and who goes, in a manner of speaking," she acknowledged. Though my role is more comprehensive than that, I'm tasked with understanding the true condition of the company, not just its financial statements, but its people, its culture, its potential. And what have you found? Rob asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. A facility with good bones, but poor leadership, she replied without hesitation. Talented workers hamstrung by myopic management, equipment investments made without proper implementation planning. And today, I found a man who knew how to fix a problem being punished for doing exactly that. Rob studied her, trying to gauge her angle. Corporate consultants weren't typically concerned with fairness to individual employees. So what does this have to do with me? I'm fired. Remember, that's why I'm here, Catherine said, leaning forward slightly. Mr. Blackwood overstepped his authority. He does not have unilateral termination power for department heads during this transition period. I'm not a department head, Rob pointed out. I'm a senior maintenance supervisor, a distinction without much difference given your responsibilities, she countered. The point is, your termination was procedurally improper and, more importantly, strategically unsound. Rob frowned. Are you saying you want to rescind my termination? I'm offering you something better, Catherine replied, her expression intent. I want you to return to Westbrook, not as a maintenance supervisor, but as Director of Operational Excellence. Rob stared at her, certain he had misheard. Director of what operational excellence? She repeated. You would report directly to the executive leadership team, with authority to identify and implement improvements across all production systems. That's a corporate title, Rob said slowly. I'm a hands-on guy. Miss Hayes, I fix things. Exactly, she nodded. Westbrook doesn't need another MBA with spreadsheets. It needs someone who understands the actual work, who can bridge the gap between management theory and operational reality. Rob stood up and paced to the window, his mind racing. This doesn't make sense. You don't know me. You saw one incident. I've been observing the facility for 2 weeks, Catherine corrected him. I've seen how workers come to you with problems. I've reviewed the maintenance logs and improvement suggestions you've submitted. I've noted that your team has the lowest downtime metrics, despite managing the oldest equipment. Rob turned back to her, genuinely startled. You've been watching me specifically. I've been watching everyone, she clarified. You stood out. Today merely confirmed my assessment. The offer was tempting more than tempting. It was a lifeline thrown when he was drowning. But years in both the military and corporate America had taught Rob to be wary of things that seemed too good to be true. What's the catch? He asked bluntly. Catherine's lips curved in a small, appreciative smile. Perceptive. The catch is that the role will be challenging. You'll be navigating between workers who may resent your promotion and executives who may question your credentials. You'll be implementing changes that will meet resistance from both directions. That's not a catch, Rob pointed out. That's just a difficult job. True, she acknowledged. The actual catch, if you want to call it that, is that we need immediate results. The new ownership has committed significant capital to revitalize Westbrook, but that commitment is contingent on demonstrating operational improvements within the first quarter. Rob considered this. So if I fail, the factory might close anyway. A possibility, she admitted, though I believe the greater risk is doing nothing. Under the current leadership, closure is not a possibility, but an inevitability. Rob ran a hand through his short hair, a gesture from his military days when situations grew complex. And Blackwood, where does he fit in this new structure? Mr. Blackwood's future with the company is being evaluated, Catherine replied diplomatically, though something in her tone suggested his prospects weren't promising. The compensation? Rob asked, feeling strange to be negotiating with this composed, enigmatic woman in his living room. Base salary of $110,000 with performance bonuses that could add another 30%, full benefits, of course, including an enhanced healthcare package and college savings plan. Rob nearly choked. It was more than double his current salary. Why me? He asked finally. the question that had been burning since she walked in. There must be dozens of candidates with the right degrees and corporate pedigree for a position like this. Catherine stood, smoothing her blazer with an elegant gesture. Degrees and pedigrees are common, Mr. Miller. What's rare is someone who truly cares about the work, who sees problems as opportunities rather than annoyances, who has earned the genuine respect of their colleagues rather than merely their compliance. She reached into her purse and withdrew a business card, offering it to him. Take the evening to consider. If you accept, be at the plant at 7 a.m. tomorrow. If not, no hard feelings. We'll still process a generous severance package for you. Rob accepted the card, a simple cream-colored rectangle bearing only her name and a phone number, no title. No company logo. One more question, he said as she moved toward the door. Why come personally? You could have sent HR or called. Catherine paused, her hand on the doorknob. For the first time, something like genuine emotion flickered across her composed features. Because I believe in looking people in the eye when making important decisions, she said quietly. And because what happened to you today was wrong. I wanted you to know that someone saw that. With those words, she slipped out into the night, leaving Rob standing in his living room, the business card in his hand, feeling like a ticket to a future he hadn't imagined possible just hours ago. Rob barely slept that night, his mind churning with possibilities and doubts. The offer was incredible, life-changing for him and Sophie, but it also meant stepping into unknown territory, taking on responsibilities far beyond his current role, and placing his trust in a company that had just publicly humiliated him. By dawn, he'd made his decision, after preparing Sophie for school with extra care, explaining that he might be going back to work after all. He dropped her at his neighbor Mrs. Abernathy's house for the morning bus pickup. "Good luck, Daddy," Sophie said, wrapping her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. "You fix things the best." Her simple faith steadied him. Whatever happened, he would make this work for her. He drove to the factory feeling like he was entering a different dimension. Just yesterday, he'd left in shame. Today, he might return as a director. The absurdity wasn't lost on him. The security guard at the gate did a double take when Rob pulled up. "Mr. Miller," he said, confusion evident in his voice. "I, was told you were—" "Things have changed, Frank," Rob replied simply. "I should be on your approved list for today." Frank checked his computer, eyebrows rising. "Yes, sir. You're cleared for all areas." He handed back Rob's ID with a newfound respect. "Have a good day, sir." The "sir" felt strange in Rob's ears as he drove to the executive parking area, another novelty. As he walked toward the main entrance, he saw a commotion by the side of the building. Trevor Blackwood was being escorted out by security, a box of personal items in his arms, his face a mask of indignant rage. Their eyes met across the parking lot. Blackwood's expression darkened with fury, but Rob simply nodded once and continued walking. There was no satisfaction in seeing the man's downfall, only a grim recognition of corporate justice. As swift and impersonal as it was sometimes undeserved, inside, the atmosphere was electric with tension and speculation. Employees gathered in small clusters, whispering about Blackwood's departure and the rumors of new ownership. They fell silent as Rob passed, eyes widening in surprise and confusion. He made his way to the executive floor territory that had previously been largely off-limits to him. The receptionist looked up as he approached. "Mr. Miller." She greeted him with new deference. "Ms. Hayes is expecting you in the conference room." Rob followed her directions to a large glass-walled room where Catherine Hayes sat reviewing documents. She looked up as he entered, and for the first time, he saw a genuine smile transform her serious features. "You came," she said, standing to greet him. Today she wore a simple navy dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. "I'm glad. The job needs doing," Rob replied simply. "And I need a job." "Pragmatic," she observed. "I appreciate that." Auntie, she gestured to the chair beside her. "Shall we begin? We have a factory to transform." As Rob took his seat, He couldn't help but feel he was stepping into a story whose outline he could only dimly perceive, one where a single moment of crisis had somehow opened a door to unexpected possibility. What he didn't yet understand was that Catherine Hayes had plans far beyond what she'd revealed, plans that would reshape not just Westbrook Manufacturing, but his life in ways he couldn't imagine. And as they began reviewing operational diagrams and improvement strategies, neither of them recognized that their professional collaboration was the first chapter of a much more complex and personal story. By the time they broke for lunch, Rob had already identified three critical system improvements that could be implemented immediately. Catherine listened intently, asking incisive questions that demonstrated a surprising technical understanding for someone he'd assumed was purely on the business side. "You know a lot about production systems for a corporate executive," he observed as they continued their tour of the facility. Catherine's expression revealed nothing. "I make it my business to understand the fundamentals of what we do," she replied. "Intelligence without context is just information. Context transforms it into knowledge." As they walked the factory floor, Rob noticed how workers straightened when they approached, their expressions a mixture of surprise at his return and wariness of the unknown executive beside him. He made a point of introducing Catherine to key team members, bridging the natural gap between management and labor. By late afternoon, they had drafted the framework of an operational improvement plan that would touch every aspect of the facility. Rob's head was spinning with the scope of what they were attempting, but for the first time in years, he felt truly engaged, his skills being used to their fullest potential. "One last thing before we finish for the day," Catherine said as they returned to the conference room. "I'd like you to meet someone." A tall, distinguished man in his 60s entered, his bearing military straight despite his age, his handshake firm as Catherine introduced him. "Robert Miller, this is James Westbrook, the founder's son and our company's new chairman." Rob felt a jolt of surprise. The Westbrook family had sold their interest in the company decades ago, or so everyone believed. "Mr. Miller," James Westbrook said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "Catherine speaks highly of your capabilities. I wanted to meet the man she believes can help restore my father's legacy." "It's an honor, sir," Rob replied, genuine respect in his voice, "though I'm still not entirely sure why you're taking a chance on me." James exchanged a look with Catherine before responding. "Sometimes the most valuable assets in a company are hidden in plain sight. Mr. Miller, Catherine has a particular talent for recognizing them." The cryptic response raised more questions than it answered. But before Rob could inquire further, James continued, "Westbrook Manufacturing isn't just another acquisition for us. It's personal. My father built this place with the belief that American manufacturing could be both excellent and honorable, that we could make world-class products while treating our people with dignity." He gazed out the window at the factory floor below. "Somewhere along the way, that vision was lost. We're here to restore it." The conviction in his voice resonated with something deep in Rob's chest, a belief that work should have meaning beyond profit, that craftsmanship and integrity still mattered. "I can't promise miracles," Rob said honestly, "but I'll give everything I have to make this place work the way it should." James nodded, satisfied. "That's all anyone can ask." He checked his watch. "I have another meeting. Catherine will handle the remaining details." After he left, Rob turned to Catherine, questions bubbling up. The Westbrooks bought back the company when, how, and what did he mean about recognizing hidden assets? Catherine gathered her papers, her movements efficient. "The acquisition was completed last week, though we're not making a public announcement until certain operational changes are in place." She glanced up at him. "As for recognizing assets, let's just say I've learned to look beyond titles and credentials to see what people are truly capable of." There was something in her tone, a personal note beneath the professional veneer, that made Rob wonder about her own story. But before he could ask, she was handing him a folder of documents. "Your official offer letter, benefits information, and initial project priorities," she explained. "Review them tonight. We'll meet again tomorrow at 8 a.m. As Rob accepted the folder, their fingers brushed momentarily. He was struck by a sudden awareness of her as more than a corporate representative, a woman with depths he couldn't fathom, whose careful composure seemed to mask something both powerful and guarded. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the opportunity and for seeing what happened yesterday for what it was. I prefer to see things as they are, not as others present them," she replied. "It's a rare quality in business, perhaps in life as well." With that enigmatic statement, she gathered her things and left, her posture perfect, her movements graceful yet purposeful. Rob stood alone in the conference room, the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. In the span of 24 hours, he had been fired and rehired, humiliated and elevated, cast out and welcomed in. His world had been turned upside down by forces he only partially understood. As he walked to his car, the setting sun casting long shadows across the parking lot, he couldn't shake the feeling that Catherine Hayes was not simply a corporate representative, but a catalyst for change that would reach far beyond Westbrook's production lines. What he didn't know couldn't know was that she had her own reasons for choosing him. Motivations that went deeper than operational efficiency or management strategy. Behind her composed exterior and professional assessment lay a personal mission that would eventually intertwine their lives in ways neither of them could anticipate. For now, though, he was simply grateful for the second chance, the opportunity to rebuild what had been so abruptly shattered. As he drove home to Sophie, the folder of documents on the passenger seat beside him, Rob allowed himself to feel something he hadn't expected to feel again. So soon hope. The next 2 weeks at Westbrook Manufacturing passed in a whirlwind of activity. Rob's days stretched from dawn until well after dark as he immersed himself in his new role. The transition from supervisor to director came with a steep learning curve as corporate politics, budget forecasts, and stakeholder presentations now occupied as much of his time as actual production problems. But unlike many who ascended to the executive ranks, Rob maintained a daily presence on the factory floor. He started each morning walking the lines, greeting workers by name, and observing operations firsthand. This wasn't a management technique he'd read in a book. It was simply who he was, a man who believed you couldn't solve problems from behind a desk. The workers' initial skepticism about his promotion gradually gave way to cautious respect. They'd seen too many executives come and go, full of buzzwords and empty promises. But Rob was one of them, someone who understood the reality of their work and fought for practical solutions rather than theoretical efficiencies. "Morning, Jeff," Rob greeted the line supervisor for the stamping area. "How's that die alignment issue we talked about yesterday?" Jeff, a 20-year veteran of the plant, gestured toward the machinery. "The maintenance crew came through last night, just like you said. First time in years someone actually listened about that calibration problem." "Good," Rob nodded. "Let me know if it starts drifting again. We're tracking all these fixes to build a proper preventative maintenance schedule." As he continued his rounds, Rob caught sight of Catherine Hayes entering the factory floor, her slender figure immediately recognizable despite the hard hat and safety glasses she'd donned for the visit. Over the past 2 weeks, they'd fallen into an effective working partnership, her strategic vision complementing his practical knowledge. Yet there remained something elusive about her, a careful distance she maintained even as they worked closely together. She was unfailingly professional, impressively knowledgeable, and occasionally revealed flashes of dry wit that surprised him. But whenever conversations veered toward the personal, she redirected with subtle efficiency. "Good morning, Robert," she said, joining him by the assembly line. She was the only one who called him by his full name rather than Rob, a small formality that somehow fit their unique dynamic. "How is the implementation progressing on this section?" "We're at about 70% of the target efficiency," he replied, showing her the real-time metrics on his tablet. "The biggest holdup is still the integration between the new robotics and the legacy conveyor system." Catherine studied the data, her expression thoughtful. "What's your solution?" "We need to replace the control modules, not just update the software." Rob explained. "It's a bigger investment up front, but it'll solve the compatibility issues once and for all." He braced for the typical executive hesitation about additional expenditure, but Catherine simply nodded. "Write up the proposal with cost projections. If the ROI timeline is under 18 months, You'll have approval by tomorrow." Her readiness to invest in proper solutions rather than Band-Aid fixes was one of the most refreshing changes under the new ownership. Resources that had been hoarded under Blackwood's regime were now being strategically deployed where they were most needed. "I appreciate the support," Rob said as they continued walking. "It makes a difference when people in your position actually understand what we're trying to accomplish down here." A shadow of something amusement irony passed briefly across Catherine's face. "People in my position," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "Yes, I suppose that's accurate enough," before Rob could question her cryptic response. His phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced down, his heart rate spiking when he saw it was from Mrs. Abernathy. "Who watched Sophie after school?" "Sophie running fever of 102. School nurse sent her home. She's asking for you." "Everything all right?" Catherine asked, noticing his expression. "Sophie's sick," Rob explained, already mentally rearranging his day. "I need to get home to her." "Of course," Catherine said without hesitation. "Family comes first. We can reschedule the budget meeting. I was supposed to present the Phase 1 results to James Westbrook this afternoon." Rob remembered, conflicted. The meeting was important, the first major milestone for the improvement initiatives. Catherine considered this. "I can handle the presentation. I'm familiar enough with the data." "Are you sure?" Rob asked, both grateful and reluctant to burden her with his responsibilities. "Absolutely," she affirmed. "Your daughter needs you. The factory will still be here tomorrow." The simple understanding in her voice, free from judgment or corporate passive aggression, lifted a weight from Rob's shoulders. In his previous position, a family emergency would have been treated as a lack of commitment, a black mark on his record. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I'll review the presentation with you by phone once I've checked on Sophie." Catherine nodded, already turning toward the offices. "Give Sophie my best." As Rob drove home, he reflected on how differently his life had unfolded than he'd anticipated 2 weeks ago. Instead of desperately hunting for a new job, he was now leading Westbrook's operational transformation with the full support of its mysterious new ownership. And instead of dealing with Blackwood's micromanagement, he was working alongside Catherine Hayes, a woman whose quiet competence and unexpected understanding continued to intrigue him, even as she remained an enigma. When Rob arrived home, he found Sophie curled up on the couch under her favorite purple blanket, her face flushed with fever. Mrs. Abernathy, their elderly neighbor who'd been a godsend since Karen's death, met him at the door. "Poor thing started feeling bad at school," she explained. "Nurse thinks it might be that flu that's going around. Thanks for picking her up." "Judith," Rob said gratefully, "I can take it from here." After Mrs. Abernathy left, Rob sat on the edge of the couch, gently brushing Sophie's hair back from her forehead. "Hey, Ladybug, not feeling so good." "Huh." Sophie's eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever. "Daddy," she murmured, "my head hurts." "I know, sweetheart," he soothed, checking her temperature again. "Let's get some medicine in you, and then maybe some soup." The rest of the day passed in the familiar rhythm of caring for a sick child, medication schedules, cool compresses, gentle coaxing to drink fluids. Rob worked remotely when Sophie dozed, reviewing documents and joining the budget meeting via conference call. By evening, her fever had come down slightly, but she was still weak and uncomfortable. As Rob heated some chicken soup in the kitchen, his phone rang. Catherine's name appeared on the screen. "How did the presentation go?" he asked upon answering. "James was pleased with the progress," Catherine replied. "He's approved the additional funding for Phase 2. "That's great news," Rob said, genuine relief in his voice. "I was worried my absence might impact the decision." "Your work speaks for itself," Catherine assured him. "How is Sophie?" "Fever's coming down, but she's still pretty miserable. Probably a few days before she's back to normal." There was a brief pause before Catherine spoke again. "I don't mean to intrude, but I've taken the liberty of arranging for a pediatric nurse to be available if you need additional support. Children's illnesses can be unpredictable, and managing alone while maintaining your work responsibilities can be challenging. Rob was momentarily taken aback by the offer. That's very thoughtful, but not necessary. We've managed before. I understand, Catherine replied, her tone neutral. The offer stands if circumstances change. Sometimes accepting help is the strongest choice a parent can make. Something in her words, a hint of personal knowledge beyond professional observation, caught Rob's attention. You sound like you speak from experience. The silence that followed was so prolonged that Rob wondered if the connection had dropped. When Catherine finally responded, her voice carried a subtle shift, a rare glimpse beneath her composed exterior. My younger sister was often ill when we were children, she said quietly. I remember how it consumed my parents' attention and energy, especially my mother's. There's no more important work than caring for your child, Robert. Everything else is secondary. The unexpected personal disclosure, small as it was, felt significant coming from someone who guarded her privacy so carefully. Before Rob could respond, Catherine smoothly redirected the conversation. I've emailed you the meeting notes and action items. Nothing requires your immediate attention. Focus on Sophie, and we'll recalibrate schedules when you return. After they hung up, Rob stood in his kitchen, the soup forgotten on the stove as he processed their conversation. In a few sentences, Catherine had revealed more about herself than in 2 weeks of working closely together and had shown a level of understanding about his situation that felt both professional and deeply personal. The enigma that was Catherine Hayes had just grown more complex, and despite his focus on Sophie, Rob couldn't help but wonder about the woman behind the polished corporate facade. Sophie's illness progressed into pneumonia by the next morning, requiring a trip to the emergency room and eventually admission to the children's hospital. Rob's world narrowed to the confines of her hospital room. The beeping monitors and antiseptic smell bringing back painful memories of Karen's final months. He notified work that he would be taking emergency family leave, preparing himself for the typical corporate response of reluctant accommodation. Instead, he received an immediate email from Catherine informing him that his position was secure. His projects would be covered, and he should take whatever time Sophie needed without concern. On the second day of Sophie's hospitalization, Rob was reviewing her treatment plan with the doctor when a nurse appeared at the door. Mr. Miller, there's a delivery for you at the nurse's station. Rob followed her, expecting perhaps flowers from his colleagues. Instead, he found a large care package containing comfortable children's pajamas, activity books, a soft, plush unicorn, and a collection of Sophie's favorite snacks for when she felt better. For Rob, there was a gift card to the hospital cafe, a phone charger, and a neck pillow for the uncomfortable hospital chair he'd been sleeping in. The card attached simply read, "For Sophie and her dad. Rest and heal." K. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, not just the items themselves, but the understanding of what both he and Sophie might need during this difficult time touched Rob deeply. This wasn't a corporate formality or an obligatory get-well gift. It was personal, considerate, and spoke of someone who knew firsthand what a hospital vigil required. Later that afternoon, as Sophie napped, Rob stepped into the hallway to make a call. Catherine Hayes, she answered, her voice crisp and professional. It's Rob, he said. I wanted to thank you for the care package. It was incredibly thoughtful. You're welcome, she replied, her tone warming slightly. Is there anything else Sophie needs? No, you've thought of everything, he assured her. The doctors are pleased with how she's responding to the antibiotics. We should be home in another day or two. That's excellent news, as Rob hesitated, then added. The unicorn was a perfect choice. How did you know purple was her favorite color? There was a slight pause before Catherine answered. You mentioned once that she had purple bows in her hair the day you were... The day at the factory, I made an educated guess. The fact that she had noticed and remembered such a small detail from a chaotic day weeks ago struck Rob as remarkable. It suggested an attention to human details that went beyond professional observation. Well, thank you again, he said, and please thank James for being so understanding about my absence. Actually, Catherine replied, a hint of something unreadable in her voice. James isn't involved in these decisions. I have full discretion regarding personnel matters. Before Rob could process this information, another piece of the puzzle regarding Catherine's true position in the company, she continued. Take care of Sophie. Robert, everything here is proceeding as planned. After they hung up, Rob returned to Sophie's room, finding her awake and already cuddling the new purple unicorn. As he watched his daughter's face light up despite her illness, he found himself increasingly curious about the woman who had somehow understood exactly what would comfort a sick 8-year-old girl she'd never formally met. Catherine Hayes was proving to be far more than the corporate representative she presented herself as, and Rob couldn't deny a growing interest in discovering the person behind the professional mask. Sophie recovered fully within a week, her resilience a constant source of amazement to Rob. When he returned to Westbrook, he found the improvement initiatives proceeding smoothly in his absence, with Catherine having personally overseen the critical implementations. Their working relationship resumed its efficient rhythm, but with a subtle shift. The brief glimpses of Catherine's personal side during Sophie's illness had created a new undercurrent of connection beneath their professional interactions. Rob found himself noticing things about Catherine he'd overlooked before, the way she absently tucked her hair behind her ear when deeply focused on a problem. Her preference for Earl Grey tea over coffee during afternoon meetings. The slight softening of her voice when speaking with the older workers nearing retirement. One evening, as they worked late finalizing the quarterly report for the board, Rob decided to test the boundaries of their evolving relationship. You never mentioned how you came to work with Westbrook, he said casually as they reviewed the final slides. Were you with James at his previous company? Catherine glanced up, her expression neutral but alert. My association with the Westbrook family is long-standing. That's vague, Rob observed with a slight smile. Yes, she agreed, the corner of her mouth lifting in acknowledgement. It is. Rob leaned back in his chair, deciding on a more direct approach. You know practically everything about me, my background, my family situation, even my daughter's favorite color, yet I know almost nothing about you. Catherine set down her pen, regarding him with an unreadable expression. What would you like to know? Robert. The directness of her question caught him off guard. He had expected another deflection, not an opening. Where did you grow up? He asked, starting with something simple. New England, she replied. Massachusetts, primarily. Though we traveled extensively. Family business. Something like that, she said, her gaze steady. My father had diverse interests that required oversight. Rob sensed there was more to this description, but didn't press. You mentioned a sister who was ill. Is she... She passed away, Catherine said quietly, a shadow crossing her features. When she was 12. Autoimmune condition. I'm sorry, Rob said sincerely. Understanding all too well the grief of losing a loved one too soon, Catherine acknowledged his sympathy with a slight nod. It was a long time ago, but it shaped me in ways I'm still discovering. The personal admission hung in the air between them, creating a moment of genuine connection that transcended their professional roles. Is that why you were so understanding about Sophie? Rob asked gently. Catherine's eyes met his, and for once, she didn't redirect or deflect. Partly, I remember what it was like to be a sick child, and to watch my parents struggle with the impossible balance between work obligations and a daughter who needed them. Your situation resonated. The vulnerability in her admission felt like a rare gift, a deliberate lowering of the careful barriers she maintained. Rob recognized its significance and responded in kind. After Karen died, I was terrified of failing Sophie, he confessed, of not being enough for her. Some days I'm still terrified. She's lucky to have you, Catherine said softly. Many children don't have a parent who puts them first. Something in her tone suggested personal knowledge rather than abstract observation. But before Rob could explore further, Catherine glanced at her watch and the moment passed. It's getting late, she noted, gathering her materials. We should both get home. as they walked to the parking lot together. Rob was acutely aware of the shift in their dynamic. They had moved beyond mere colleagues to something more complex, not quite friends, but no longer simply business associates. At Catherine's car, a sleek but understated luxury sedan. She paused before opening the door. "Thank you for your work on the quarterly report. Robert, James will be impressed with our progress." "It's a team effort," Rob replied, "though I'm still trying to understand my place in the larger strategy." Catherine studied him for a moment, as if making a decision. "James is hosting a charity gala next weekend to announce the Westbrook family's return and their vision for the company's future. Your presence would be valuable." Rob grimaced slightly. "A gala isn't exactly my natural habitat." "Nor mine," Catherine admitted, surprising him. "But appearances matter in this context. The invitation extends to a guest. If you'd like to bring someone," the subtle phrasing, specifically not assuming he would bring a date, was characteristic of Catherine's careful attention to detail regarding his situation as a widower. "I appreciate the invitation," Rob said, "though I'll have to find a babysitter for Sophie." "Actually," Catherine said, "the event is family-friendly. Several board members are bringing their children. Sophie would be welcome." The inclusion of his daughter in the invitation touched Rob unexpectedly. "In that case, we'll be there." Catherine smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her serious features. "Excellent. I'll send you the details." She opened her car door, then paused. "And Robert, don't worry about fitting in. Your authenticity is an asset, not a liability." As he watched her drive away, Rob felt a growing sense that the boundaries between his professional and personal life were becoming increasingly blurred, and that Catherine Hayes was somehow at the center of this transformation. Amram. The night of the gala arrived with a flurry of preparation in the Miller household. Rob dusted off his only suit purchased for Karen's funeral and barely worn since while Sophie twirled excitedly in a new purple dress they'd bought for the occasion. "Do I look like a princess, Daddy?" she asked, performing another spin that made the skirt billow out around her. "The prettiest princess in Michigan," Rob assured her, adjusting his tie with limited success. Despite Catherine's reassurance about authenticity, he couldn't help feeling out of place at the prospect of an upscale corporate event. The gala was being held at the Grand River Hotel, one of the most elegant venues in the city, as Rob and Sophie entered the opulent ballroom. He was immediately struck by the stark contrast between this world of crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes and the practical reality of the factory floor. Executives and board members mingled with local politicians and business leaders. Everyone dressed in formal attire that made Rob's off-the-rack suit feel woefully inadequate. Sophie, however, was unintimidated, her eyes wide with wonder at the decorations and the elegant crowd. "Mr. Miller," James Westbrook approached, extending his hand. The older man was impeccably dressed in a tailored tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. "And this must be the famous Sophie I've heard so much about." Rob shook his hand, surprised by the chairman's warm greeting. "Thank you for including us, Mr. Westbrook." "James, please," the older man insisted, bending slightly to address Sophie. "Hello, young lady. Are you enjoying yourself?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Your party is very fancy. Our house doesn't have chandeliers." James laughed, a genuine sound of delight. "Few houses do, unfortunately. Perhaps you'd like some ice cream. There's a sundae bar at the back that I've been told is quite impressive." Sophie looked to Rob for permission, her eyes pleading. "Go ahead," he nodded. "Stay where I can see you." As Sophie darted off toward the promised desserts, James guided Rob toward a less crowded area of the ballroom. "Catherine tells me you've been instrumental in the operational turnaround. The metrics are exceeding our projections." "The workers deserve the credit," Rob replied honestly. "They've embraced the changes once they saw we were serious about investing in solutions. Not just cutting costs." James nodded approvingly. "That's precisely the perspective we need. Too many executives lose sight of the human element in manufacturing." As they continued their conversation, Rob became aware of a subtle stir in the crowd near the entrance. He glanced over and momentarily lost his train of thought. Catherine Hayes had arrived, and she was breathtaking. She wore an elegant emerald green gown that contrasted dramatically with her dark hair, which was styled in a sophisticated updo. A simple diamond pendant at her throat caught the light as she moved, and her usual composed expression was enhanced by subtle makeup that accentuated her striking features. Several executives immediately gravitated toward her, but she navigated through them with graceful determination, scanning the room as if looking for someone specific. "Ah, Catherine has arrived," James observed, following Rob's gaze. "If you'll excuse me, there are some people I should introduce her to." Left alone, Rob found himself watching Catherine's progress through the crowd. She was in her element here, moving easily among the corporate elite. Yet there was something in her bearing that seemed slightly apart from it all, an observer even as she participated. Their eyes met across the room, and Catherine's polite social smile transformed into something warmer and more genuine. She said something to the group around her and began making her way toward him. "Robert," she greeted him, her voice a welcome familiarity in the sea of strangers. "I'm glad you came." "Catherine," he replied, momentarily at a loss for words. "You look not like someone who spends her days reviewing production metrics." A soft laugh escaped her, a sound he realized he'd rarely heard. "I could say the same for you. The suit suits you." "It's my only one," he admitted. "Not exactly in my daily rotation." "Honesty," she said, her eyes warm. "That's refreshingly rare in these circles." Before Rob could respond, Sophie appeared at his side, her face smeared with chocolate ice cream. "Daddy, they have sprinkles and hot fudge and whipped cream?" Catherine turned her attention to the excited child, kneeling slightly despite her elegant dress to meet Sophie at eye level. "You must be Sophie. I'm Catherine. Your dad has told me a lot about you." Sophie studied her with unabashed curiosity. "You're pretty. Are you Daddy's boss?" "Sophie," Rob began, slightly embarrassed, but Catherine shook her head. "It's a fair question," she said to Rob before addressing Sophie again. "Your dad and I work together. We're partners in making the factory better." "The factory where Daddy got fired and then unfired?" Sophie asked innocently. Catherine's expression softened. "That's right, though I think getting unfired was one of the best decisions we ever made." Sophie nodded solemnly. "Daddy says you're super smart and know everything about the machines." "Does he?" Catherine glanced up at Rob, a hint of pleased surprise in her eyes. Rob felt a flush of embarrassment that his private comments to Sophie had been so directly reported. "I may have mentioned your comprehensive understanding of the operation a few times." The moment was interrupted by a server approaching Catherine. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Westbrook is requesting your presence for the announcement." Catherine nodded, then turned back to Sophie and Rob. "Duty calls. Save me a dance later." The question was directed at Rob, a subtle personal invitation amid the corporate formalities. "I'd like that," he replied, surprised by his own eagerness, as Catherine moved toward the small stage at the front of the ballroom. Sophie tugged at Rob's hand. "I like her. Daddy, she doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby." "No, she doesn't." Rob agreed, watching as Catherine joined James Westbrook near the podium. There was something in their interaction, a familial ease that went beyond professional association, that caught his attention. The room quieted as James stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. This evening marks a new chapter for Westbrook Manufacturing, a return to the principles upon which my father founded this company 60 years ago." He spoke eloquently about the history of the company, its roots in the community, and the family's decision to reacquire control after decades of corporate ownership. Throughout his speech, Catherine stood slightly behind him, her posture perfect, her expression attentive, yet revealing nothing. "The future of Westbrook," James continued, "will be built on innovation, quality, and most importantly, respect for the people who make our success possible, our employees." The crowd applauded politely, though Rob noticed some of the executives exchanging skeptical glances. James's people-first philosophy clearly ran counter to the cost-cutting mentality that had dominated American manufacturing for decades. To help lead this transformation, James said, I've assembled a team that understands both the business challenges we face and the human implications of our decisions. He gestured to Catherine. Central to this vision is our new executive director, whose insight and leadership have already begun to reshape our operations. So, Rob expected James to continue with Catherine's introduction, but instead, the older man smiled and stepped back from the microphone, yielding the platform to her. This wasn't the typical acknowledgement of a senior executive. It was a passing of the torch. Catherine stepped forward with quiet confidence. Thank you, James. She surveyed the room, her gaze momentarily finding Rob in the crowd before continuing. Westbrook Manufacturing was built on the belief that American craftsmanship, innovation, and fair labor practices could coexist profitably. That vision isn't outdated, it's more relevant now than ever. She spoke without notes, her voice clear and compelling as she outlined a vision of revitalized American manufacturing that balanced technological advancement with human expertise. It wasn't the standard corporate presentation filled with buzzwords and vague promises. It was a substantive strategy grounded in practical realities Rob recognized from their daily work. Many said this facility couldn't compete in today's global market. She continued. They were wrong. With targeted investment and by leveraging the experience of our workforce, we've already improved efficiency by 22% in just one fiscal quarter. A murmur of surprise ran through the crowd. These were impressive numbers by any standard. This is just the beginning, Catherine asserted. Westbrook isn't just a business to us, it's a legacy and a responsibility. We're committed to proving that American manufacturing can thrive when we invest in both our technology and our people. As she concluded her remarks to enthusiastic applause, Rob felt a surge of pride in being part of the transformation she described. But beneath that professional satisfaction stirred a more personal admiration for the woman herself, her vision, her quiet determination, and the depth of commitment that animated her usually composed features when she spoke about the company's future. Later, as the formal dinner concluded and the orchestra began playing, Rob found himself standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching as various executives and their partners moved to the music. Sophie had been absorbed into a small group of children being entertained by a professional magician in an adjacent room, leaving Rob momentarily alone with his thoughts. Not joining the dancers, Catherine's voice came from beside him, and he turned to find her watching the crowd with an expression that mirrored his own outsider's perspective. Dancing isn't exactly in my skill set, Rob admitted. Army training covered a lot of things, but ballroom dancing wasn't one of them. A small smile touched her lips. Would it surprise you to learn it's not my favorite activity either? Actually, yes, Rob replied honestly. You seem perfectly at home in all this. He gestured to the elegant surroundings. Catherine's expression grew thoughtful. Being at home in an environment doesn't necessarily mean belonging to it. She looked at him directly. Sometimes the places where we're most comfortable aren't the ones where we're most authentic. The observation carried a weight that suggested personal significance beyond the immediate context. Before Rob could explore it further, the orchestra began a slower, more melodic piece. About that dance you promised, Catherine said, her tone lightening. Shall we? Rob hesitated only briefly before offering his hand. I warned you about my dancing. I'll take my chances, she replied, placing her hand in his, as they moved onto the dance floor. Rob was acutely aware of the contrast they presented, his rented suit and military short hair alongside her elegance and sophistication. Yet when he cautiously placed his hand at her waist and she rested hers lightly on his shoulder, the difference seemed to matter less than the unexpected rightness of the moment. They moved together with surprising ease, finding a natural rhythm despite Rob's limited experience. Catherine followed his lead gracefully, neither dominating nor passive in their shared movement. You're better at this than you claimed, she observed as they turned slowly to the music. Maybe it's the partner, Rob replied, the words slipping out before he could consider their implications. Catherine's eyes met his, and for a moment, the careful professional distance between them seemed to diminish. In its place was something more complex and potentially more significant, a recognition of connection that transcended their working relationship. "Robert," she began, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "There's something I should— Daddy, look what I learned." Sophie's excited voice broke the moment as she bounded up to them, proudly displaying a coin she'd apparently made disappear under the magician's tutelage. Catherine stepped back smoothly, the professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. But Rob had seen beneath it, if only for a moment, and the glimpse left him with more questions than answers about the enigmatic woman who had become so central to his professional and, increasingly, his personal life. As the evening drew to a close, Rob found himself standing beside Catherine in the hotel's grand foyer, waiting for the valet to bring their respective vehicles. Sophie had fallen asleep against his shoulder, the excitement of the evening finally catching up with her. "She's had quite a night," Catherine observed, her expression softening as she looked at the sleeping child. "We both have," Rob replied. "Thank you for including us. It meant a lot to Sophie." "And to you?" Catherine asked, a rare directness in her question. Rob considered his answer carefully. "It's a different world from what I'm used to," he admitted. "But seeing the bigger picture, understanding the vision for Westbrook that matters to me." Catherine studied him for a moment, then reached out to gently adjust Sophie's hair where it had fallen across her face, a surprisingly tender gesture from someone usually so contained. "You know," she said quietly, "in many ways, you understand the heart of what we're trying to do better than most of the executives in that room. You see the human element, not just the balance sheet." The compliment warmed him, but there was something in her tone, a hint of division between herself and the corporate world she navigated so skillfully, that caught his attention. "You talk about the executives as if you're not one of them," he observed. "Yet you're clearly central to the operation." Catherine's expression grew guarded. "My role is complicated," before Rob could press further. The valet arrived with his car, as he secured Sophie in the back seat, still sleeping soundly. He felt Catherine watching them with an expression he couldn't quite decipher, something between longing and resolve. "Good night, Robert," she said as he returned to where she stood. "Thank you for the dance," acting on impulse rather than calculation. Rob leaned forward and kissed her cheek, a brief, gentle gesture that nonetheless crossed the carefully maintained boundary between them. "Good night, Catherine," he replied softly, as he drove home with his sleeping daughter in the back seat. Rob replayed the evening in his mind, the dance, the almost confession, the undefined but undeniable connection that had formed between himself and Catherine Hayes. Something was shifting between them, evolving beyond professional collaboration into a territory he hadn't navigated since Karen's death. What he couldn't know, was that Catherine was simultaneously sitting in her own car, her composed exterior momentarily fractured as she touched her cheek where his lips had brushed it, wrestling with a decision that would either deepen their connection or potentially destroy it completely. The morning after the gala, Rob woke to Sophie bouncing on his bed, her energy fully restored after a night's sleep. "Daddy, can we have pancakes? The special ones with blueberries?" she asked, already pulling at his hand. "Slow down, ladybug," Rob laughed, allowing himself to be dragged toward the kitchen. "Let me at least brush my teeth first." As he prepared their Saturday morning pancakes, a tradition since Sophie was old enough to sit in a high chair, Rob found his thoughts returning to Catherine. The dance, the almost shared confidence, the brief moment when her carefully maintained composure had softened. Something had shifted between them, though he couldn't quite define what that meant for their working relationship, let alone anything beyond it. "Was Catherine a princess before she worked with you?" Sophie asked, interrupting his thoughts as she carefully arranged blueberries into a smiley face on her pancake. Rob smiled at his daughter's perception. "What makes you think she was a princess?" "She has princess manners," Sophie explained matter-of-factly. "Like in my books. And she wears fancy clothes. But she's not snobby like Molly's mom." "No, she's definitely not snobby," Rob agreed. Struck by his daughter's assessment, Catherine did carry herself with an ingrained poise that spoke of privileged upbringing, yet without the condescension he'd encountered from other executives. "I think she likes you," Sophie continued, her attention still on arranging her blueberries. She looks at you the way Miss Garcia looks at Mr. Fernandez. Rob nearly choked on his coffee. Ms. Garcia and Mr. Fernandez, your teachers. Sophie nodded solemnly. They think nobody knows their boyfriend and girlfriend, but everyone can tell. They get all smiley when they see each other. The innocent observation unsettled Rob more than he cared to admit. Had his interest in Catherine been that transparent, and more surprisingly, had she shown signs of reciprocating that interest obvious enough for an 8-year-old to detect? Catherine and I work together, Sophie, he explained carefully. We're friends. Mom would like her, Sophie said simply, then moved on to another topic with the fluid attention span of childhood. Leaving Rob to ponder her unexpected assertion, would Karen have liked Catherine? The question lingered as he cleaned up breakfast and helped Sophie with her weekend chores. His late wife had been warm, open, and naturally empathetic, seemingly opposite to Catherine's reserved, analytical demeanor. Yet both women shared a core of integrity and directness he'd always valued. Later that morning, as Sophie played in the backyard, Rob found himself scrolling through his phone to the photos from the gala that James's assistant had already circulated. He paused on one capturing a moment during his dance with Catherine. The photographer had caught them in profile, their expressions unguarded as they spoke. Something in the way they leaned toward each other, the attentive angle of Catherine's head, the slight smile on Rob's face, suggested an intimacy that transcended their professional relationship. The ringing of the doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Setting aside his phone, Rob went to answer it, expecting perhaps the neighbor's kid selling fundraiser cookies. Instead, he found James Westbrook standing on his porch, dressed casually in khakis and a light sweater that still somehow conveyed wealth and privilege. James, Rob said, surprise evident in his voice. This is unexpected. The older man smiled apologetically. I hope I'm not intruding on your weekend. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by briefly. Rob doubted the chairman of Westbrook Manufacturing routinely found himself in the neighborhood of middle-class suburban developments, but he stepped aside to welcome him. Please, come in. Can I offer you coffee? That would be excellent, thank you, James replied, following Rob into the house. As Rob prepared the coffee, he was acutely aware of James taking in the modest surroundings, the well-worn furniture, Sophie's artwork decorating the refrigerator, the family photos on the mantel. You have a lovely home, James commented, his tone genuine rather than condescending. It feels lived in, comfortable. It's nothing fancy, Rob acknowledged, but it works for us. James accepted the offered mug of coffee and took a seat at the kitchen table. I wanted to thank you personally for attending last night. Your presence was valuable more than you might realize. Rob sat across from him, curious about the true purpose behind this unexpected visit. I was honored to be included. Sophie certainly enjoyed herself. Yes, she's a delightful child, James smiled. Catherine mentioned how well she's recovered from her recent illness. The casual reference to Catherine's awareness of Sophie's health underscored the unusual level of personal interest she had taken in his family circumstances. She's resilient, Rob said. Like her mother was. James's expression grew thoughtful. You lost your wife, 3 years ago? Yes, Rob confirmed, slightly surprised by the chairman's knowledge of his personal history. Cancer. It was aggressive diagnosis too. He paused, still finding it difficult to say the word. It was less than 7 months. I'm very sorry, James said, genuine empathy in his voice. I lost my wife 20 years ago. Different circumstances, but the hole they leave behind is the same. The shared experience of widowhood created an unexpected connection between the factory director and the wealthy businessman. For a moment, they were simply two men who understood a particular kind of loss. Does it get easier? Rob asked, the question escaping before he could consider its appropriateness. James considered this. Not easier, different. The sharp edges wear down. You build a life around the absence. He glanced toward the backyard where Sophie could be seen playing. Having a child helps, gives purpose to moving forward. Rob nodded in understanding. Sophie had been his anchor in the storm of grief, the reason he got out of bed each morning when everything else seemed pointless. "Robert," James said, setting down his coffee mug, "I didn't come here just to reminisce about our shared experiences. Though I value the connection, I came because I believe in being direct with people I respect." The shift in tone alerted Rob that they were moving to the real purpose of this visit. "I appreciate directness," he replied. "Good." James nodded. "Then I'll be frank. Catherine Hayes is not simply my executive director. She's my niece, my brother's daughter, and the primary shareholder of Westbrook Manufacturing." Rob stared at him, processing this revelation. "Catherine is a Westbrook. She's the owner. She prefers to be judged on her merits rather than her name or position," James explained. "When we reacquired the company, she insisted on establishing herself based on her capabilities, not her ownership stake." The pieces began to fall into place: Catherine's authoritative presence, her comprehensive knowledge of the company, the deference James showed her despite his senior position. She wasn't merely an executive. She was the driving force behind the entire Westbrook revival. "Why are you telling me this?" Rob asked, sensing there was more to this disclosure than simple transparency. James studied him thoughtfully. "Because I've observed how you interact with my niece and how she responds to you. There's a connection there that goes beyond professional collaboration." Rob felt a flush of discomfort at having his personal feelings discussed so directly. "Sir, I assure you," James held up a hand, "this isn't a warning or a reprimand. Robert, quite the opposite. Catherine has spent her life surrounded by people who want something from her access to her wealth, her influence, her connections. It's made her cautious, especially in personal relationships." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "What makes you unique is that you had no idea who she really was. You treated her as a colleague, challenged her ideas, shared your expertise without agenda or pretense. Do you have any idea how rare that is in her world?" The implications of James's words hung in the air between them. Rob thought back to Catherine's careful privacy, her occasional cryptic comments about her position, the subtle distance she maintained even as they grew closer. "She should have told me," Rob said finally. "I deserved to know who I was really working for." "Perhaps," James conceded. "But can you honestly say you would have behaved the same way toward her if you'd known from the beginning that she was a Westbrook, a billionaire, with the power to determine the fate of the entire company?" The question struck Rob with uncomfortable precision. Would he have been as forthright, as natural in their interactions if he'd known her true identity? Or would the knowledge have created an insurmountable barrier of wealth and position? "I like to think I would have," Rob said, though uncertainty tinged his voice. "Catherine didn't want to take that chance," James said gently. "She values authenticity above all else, likely because it's been so rare in her experience." "Why tell me now?" Rob asked, still processing the implications of this revelation. James stood, carrying his empty mug to the sink with the casual courtesy of a man who respected work of all kinds. "Because Catherine intends to tell you herself. Very soon. And because I wanted you to have time to consider what this information means to you before she does." He turned to face Rob directly. "My niece is brilliant, driven, and deeply committed to revitalizing the legacy our family built. She's also a woman who has learned to guard herself against disappointment, whatever your feelings may be toward her. I ask only that you be honest both with her and with yourself about whether her position changes those feelings." The gravity of James's request wasn't lost on Rob. This wasn't simply about a workplace relationship or even a potential romance. It was about seeing the person beneath the position, about whether genuine connection could bridge the vast gulf of their different worlds. "I appreciate your candor," Rob said finally, "and your concern for Catherine." James nodded, seemingly satisfied with the response, as Rob walked him to the door. The older man paused for a final observation. "You know, Robert, true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios. It's found in relationships built on trust and mutual respect." He glanced toward the backyard where Sophie was now constructing an elaborate fort from lawn chairs and blankets. You're a wealthy man in ways that matter most. With those parting words, James left, leaving Rob standing in his doorway with a head full of questions and a heart increasingly certain of at least one answer. His feelings for Catherine transcended whatever title or position she held. The real question was whether their worlds could ever truly merge, or if the gulf between them would ultimately prove too wide to cross. Monday morning arrived with a tension Rob hadn't experienced since his first day in the executive role. The knowledge of Catherine's true identity sat like a weight on his chest as he drove to the factory, his thoughts churning with questions and uncertainty. How should he approach her? Should he wait for her to reveal herself as James had suggested, or acknowledge what he now knew? The choice was taken from him when he arrived at his office to find a simple note on his desk in Catherine's distinctive handwriting. Robert, could we meet privately this evening after operations close? There's something important I need to discuss with you. The formal request, so different from their usual direct communication, confirmed that something significant had shifted. Rob sent a brief text in response 7 p.m. in my office. I'll be there. The day passed in a blur of meetings and production challenges. Though Rob found it difficult to focus fully on any task, by the time the evening shift change arrived and the day crew filed out, the factory took on the quiet, hollow atmosphere that always reminded Rob of an empty cathedral high ceilings, dormant machinery, and the lingering echo of productive activity. At precisely 7 p.m., Catherine appeared in his doorway. She wore a simple gray dress rather than her usual business attire, her hair loose around her shoulders. The slight deviation from her professional appearance seemed symbolic of the more personal nature of their meeting. "Thank you for staying late," she said, her composure intact though a certain tension was evident in her posture. "Of course," Rob replied, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Your note sounded important." Catherine closed the door before taking the offered seat, a small action that emphasized the privacy of their conversation. For a moment, she simply studied him, as if trying to memorize his features or gather her resolve. "I haven't been entirely honest with you, Robert," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of her words, "about who I am and my position at Westbrook." Rob considered his options and chose honesty. "You're Catherine Westbrook, the owner, not just an executive director." Surprise flickered across her features, quickly replaced by understanding. "James told you yesterday," Rob confirmed. "He thought I should have time to process the information before you and I spoke." "I see." Catherine's expression revealed little of her thoughts regarding her uncle's intervention. "And have you processed it?" Rob leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "I'm still working through what it means. For the company, for our working relationship, for—" He hesitated, then finished. "For whatever exists between us beyond that." Catherine's gaze didn't waver from his. "That's precisely why I kept my identity private. Once people know the Westbrook name and what it represents, they no longer see me. They see the fortune, the power, the influence. Every interaction becomes colored by that knowledge." "You didn't trust me to see past it," Rob observed, a hint of hurt in his voice. "It wasn't about trust in you specifically," she countered. "It was about a lifetime of experience that taught me caution. Do you know how many people have claimed to care about me only to reveal later that they were interested in what I could provide them?" The vulnerability in her admission softened Rob's lingering sense of betrayal. "I can only imagine. But we've worked closely for weeks now. You must have realized at some point that I wasn't after your money or influence." "I did," she acknowledged. "That's why this conversation is happening now. Because somewhere along the way, you became more than a valuable employee or even a trusted colleague. You became—" She paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "Important to me. Personally." The directness of her statement hung in the air between them. Neither a full confession of deeper feelings, nor a simple acknowledgement of friendship. It was Catherine's way of opening a door without fully committing to what lay beyond it. "You've become important to me too," Rob replied, matching her honesty with his own. "That hasn't changed with James's revelation, but I won't pretend it doesn't complicate things." Catherine's expression softened slightly. How so? Rob stood, finding it easier to articulate his thoughts while moving. You're Catherine Westbrook, billionaire heiress, industrial magnate, someone who moves in circles I can barely imagine. I'm a factory manager with a mortgage, a used car, and a daughter who needs braces next year. Our worlds aren't just different, they're practically separate universes. Is that how you see it? Catherine asked, her voice quiet but intent. That wealth and social position create insurmountable barriers. Not insurmountable, Rob clarified, but significant. You can't deny that. I don't, she agreed. But I've found that genuine connection is rare enough that when it appears, external factors like wealth and background matter far less than character, values, and mutual respect. She stood as well, reducing the physical distance between them. Those are the true measures of compatibility, Robert, and in those areas, I've found we align remarkably well. The simple declaration, delivered with Catherine's characteristic directness, cut through Rob's swirling doubts. Whatever worlds they came from, whatever complications might lie ahead, the foundation between them was solid, built on shared values and genuine understanding. I've missed this, he admitted, gesturing between them. The straightforward way we talk to each other, no corporate doublespeak, no hidden agendas. A small smile touched Catherine's lips. Even when I was hiding a rather significant detail about my identity, even then, Rob confirmed, you may have omitted your last name, but you've always been honest about what matters, your vision for the company, your respect for the workers, your commitment to doing things right rather than just quickly or cheaply. He took a step closer, entering the undefined space that existed between professional distance and personal intimacy. The Catherine I've come to know isn't defined by her bank account or her family name. She's defined by her integrity, her intelligence, and her determination to build something that matters. Catherine's carefully maintained composure wavered slightly, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. That may be the most meaningful thing anyone has ever said to me. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Rob was acutely aware of how different this woman was from anyone he'd known, not just in wealth or position, but in the unique combination of strength and sensitivity that defined her character. So where do we go from here? He asked finally. Now that everything is out in the open, Catherine considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. I propose we continue as we have been working together, getting to know each other, allowing whatever is developing between us to evolve naturally. She met his gaze directly. But without the barrier of my hidden identity, complete honesty from this point forward. I can work with that, Rob agreed, relief evident in his voice. The revelation of Catherine's true identity hadn't destroyed what had been building between them. It had simply added another dimension to navigate. Catherine glanced at her watch. It's getting late. You should get home to Sophie. The mention of his daughter reminded Rob of another complication. What do I tell her about you, about who you really are? Catherine's expression softened at the reference to Sophie. The truth, but perhaps simplified, that I'm part of the family that owns the factory. But I prefer to be known for my work rather than my name. She already thinks you're a princess, Rob said with a small smile. Finding out you're actually industrial royalty will only confirm her theory. Catherine laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed her usually composed features. I've been called many things in the business world, but princess is definitely a first. As they walked together to the parking lot, a comfortable silence settled between them. The revelation that could have created an unbridgeable gap had instead cleared the air, allowing them to move forward with greater understanding. At her car, Catherine paused. Thank you, Robert. For what? For seeing me, she said simply. The real me, not the name or the position or the fortune. It's rarer than you might imagine, acting on impulse rather than calculation. Rob reached out and took her hand, a small gesture that nonetheless crossed the careful boundaries they had maintained. Thank you for trusting me enough to show me. Their eyes held for a long moment, neither willing to break the connection. Then Catherine leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, brief but deliberate, a promise of possibilities yet to unfold. "Good night, Robert," she said softly. "Good night, Catherine," he replied, watching as she drove away, her taillights disappearing into the night, as Rob made his way home. The weight that had pressed on him since James's visit lifted. The path ahead wasn't clear or simple. There would be complexities and challenges in bridging their different worlds, but for the first time since Karen's death, he felt the stirring of something he'd thought might never return, the quiet excitement of a heart opening to new possibilities. Kasuam. The following weeks brought a subtle but significant shift in Rob and Catherine's relationship, with her true identity revealed. Catherine seemed more relaxed, allowing glimpses of her personality that had previously been carefully guarded. She began joining Rob for lunch in the factory cafeteria rather than the executive dining room, engaging directly with workers and demonstrating a genuine interest in their perspectives. For his part, Rob found himself increasingly comfortable in the executive realm, his natural confidence bolstered by Catherine's unwavering support. Their professional partnership strengthened as they implemented Phase 2 of the improvement plan, addressing deeper structural issues in the production process. Their personal connection evolved as well, though both maintained a careful balance between professional collaboration and growing personal involvement. Small moments accumulated, Catherine joining Rob and Sophie for pizza and a movie night, Rob helping Catherine understand the practical implications of technical upgrades, shared coffees during early morning planning sessions that sometimes veered into conversations about books, music, and life experiences. Sophie, with a child's natural adaptability, accepted Catherine's newly revealed position with minimal fuss. "So you're like a queen of the factory?" she had asked during Catherine's first visit to their home. "More like a caretaker," Catherine had replied thoughtfully. "My family built the factory a long time ago, and now it's my job to make sure it continues to provide good jobs and make useful things." The simple explanation had satisfied Sophie, who promptly invited Catherine to see her collection of stuffed unicorns, an honor not bestowed lightly. Watching Catherine sitting cross-legged on Sophie's bedroom floor, earnestly discussing the merits of various unicorn names, Rob had felt a surge of something deeper than attraction or admiration, a recognition that this composed, brilliant woman contained depths of warmth and authenticity that few were privileged to witness. On a crisp autumn morning, nearly 3 months after Rob's promotion, he arrived at work to find Catherine waiting in his office, her expression uncharacteristically tense. "We have a situation," she said without preamble. "The Porter contract is in jeopardy." Rob frowned. Porter Automotive was their largest client, representing nearly 30% of Westbrook's annual revenue. "What happened?" "Their procurement director claims our latest shipment failed quality standards," Catherine explained, handing him a detailed report. "They're threatening to source from our competitor in Tennessee if we can't resolve the issue immediately." Rob scanned the report, his concern deepening. "These failure rates are significantly higher than our internal testing showed. Something doesn't add up." "Exactly," Catherine agreed. "I need you to personally investigate. If there's a genuine quality issue, we need to identify and correct it immediately. If not, we need to understand why Porter is claiming defects that don't exist." Rob finished her thought. "Could be a negotiating tactic for their next contract, or pressure from our competitors. Whatever it is, we need answers quickly," Catherine said. "I've arranged for you to visit their testing facility tomorrow. You'll have full access to their quality control data in the supposedly defective parts." Rob nodded, already mentally reorganizing his schedule. "I'll handle it. What's our leverage if this turns out to be a strong-arm tactic?" "We're one of the few suppliers certified for their new electric vehicle platform," Catherine replied. "Switching suppliers would delay their production timeline by at least 6 months. It's a card I'd rather not play unless necessary, but it's there if we need it." The efficiency of their exchange, the immediate understanding, the shared strategic thinking highlighted how seamlessly they had learned to work together. There was no need for extended explanations or diplomatic phrasing. They trusted each other's judgment and capabilities implicitly. "I'll need the original testing data from our quality control department," Rob said, already reaching for his phone. "Already requested," Catherine assured him. "It should be in your email within the hour." Rob smiled slightly. "You thought of everything, as usual." "Not everything," Catherine admitted, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "I was hoping we could have dinner this weekend. Sophie mentioned wanting to try that new ice cream place downtown." The casual reference to a planned outing with his daughter revealed how naturally Catherine had begun to integrate into their lives. What had started as occasional work-related interactions had evolved into regular shared activities, museum visits, Saturday morning pancakes, impromptu game nights where Catherine revealed a surprisingly competitive streak. "Rain check," Rob suggested. "I may need to work through the weekend if this Porter situation gets complicated." "Of course," Catherine agreed. "The company comes first right now." She hesitated, then added more personally. "But I was looking forward to it." The simple admission, a small vulnerability from someone who rarely revealed such things, warmed Rob unexpectedly. "So was I. We'll reschedule as soon as this is resolved, I promise." As Catherine left to prepare for her next meeting, Rob found himself reflecting on how seamlessly she had become part of his daily life, not just professionally, but personally. The careful boundary they had initially maintained had gradually blurred, replaced by a comfortable intimacy that felt both natural and significant. The Porter crisis consumed the next several days. Rob's investigation revealed that the reported quality issues were largely exaggerated, a negotiating tactic, as Catherine had suspected, aimed at securing price concessions for the upcoming contract renewal. With Catherine's strategic guidance and Rob's technical expertise, they navigated the challenge successfully, maintaining both the relationship with Porter and Westbrook's pricing structure. It was a textbook example of their complementary strengths. Catherine's business acumen paired with Rob's practical knowledge and integrity. The experience strengthened their professional bond, but it was the aftermath that would prove more personally significant. On Friday evening, after the situation had been successfully resolved, Rob was completing his final report when Catherine appeared in his doorway. She had changed from her usual business attire into jeans and a simple sweater, a rare casual appearance that somehow made her seem more approachable, more human. "You did exceptional work this week," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Porter's CEO personally called James to express his confidence in our partnership moving forward." "It was a team effort," Rob replied, saving his document and closing his laptop. "Your negotiation strategy was brilliant." Catherine accepted the compliment with a slight nod. "I've been thinking about what you said when we first discussed this situation about understanding motivations beyond the surface issues. That perspective was invaluable." Rob stood, gathering his things as he prepared to leave. "One thing the military teaches you: the stated problem is rarely the actual problem. There's always something deeper driving the conflict. A philosophy that applies far beyond business negotiations," Catherine observed thoughtfully. Rob glanced at her, struck by the personal undertone in her comment. "Something on your mind?" Catherine seemed to make a decision, straightening from her relaxed position against the doorframe. "Actually, yes, I'd like to show you something. If you have time this evening." The request was unusual enough to pique Rob's curiosity. "Sophie's at a sleepover with her friend Emma. I'm free." "Good," Catherine nodded. "Would you mind following me in your car? It's about a 30-minute drive." The mysterious invitation intrigued Rob. In all their interactions, Catherine had never made such an open-ended request, one that clearly extended beyond their professional relationship. "Lead the way," he agreed, curious about what she wanted to share. They drove north out of the city, Catherine's sleek sedan setting a moderate pace that Rob's more modest vehicle easily maintained. As the urban landscape gave way to wooded countryside, Rob wondered where they were headed and what Catherine intended to show him. After about 25 minutes, Catherine turned onto a private road marked only by a discreet sign reading Westbrook Estate. They passed through an unobtrusive but clearly state-of-the-art security gate, then continued up a winding drive bordered by ancient maple trees ablaze with autumn color. Rob had expected an ostentatious mansion the stereotypical billionaire showcase. What emerged instead was a graceful stone home, substantial but not overwhelming. Its architecture, classic American rather than flashy modern, the house nestled naturally into its wooded surroundings, as if it had grown organically from the landscape. Catherine parked in a circular drive, and Rob pulled in beside her, taking in the unexpected setting. As they both exited their vehicles, he noticed her watching his reaction carefully. "This is your home?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "One of them," she acknowledged. "But this is where I actually live, not just reside." The distinction seemed important to her. The others are more for business purposes or family obligations. She led him up a stone pathway to the main entrance. Unlike many wealthy estates, there was no uniformed staff waiting to greet them, just a warm, inviting foyer with natural wood and stone elements that echoed the exterior. "Make yourself comfortable," Catherine invited, gesturing to a spacious living room with large windows overlooking the wooded property. "Would you like something to drink? I have a decent selection, though I'm afraid my bartending skills are limited." "Just water is fine," Rob replied, taking in his surroundings with interest. The room defied his expectations of a billionaire's home. While clearly expensive and tastefully designed, it lacked the cold showroom quality he'd anticipated. Books filled the shelves, actual, well-read volumes, not decorative leather sets. A half-completed puzzle occupied one table, and family photographs in simple frames adorned the mantel. It was a home, not a showcase, a place where someone actually lived rather than merely displayed their wealth. Catherine returned with 2 glasses of water and joined him by the windows. "You seem surprised," she observed. "I expected something more ostentatious," she supplied with a small smile. "Gold fixtures and marble everything," Rob laughed. "Something like that. This is beautiful, but it's not what people imagine when they think billionaire estate." "That's precisely why I wanted you to see it," Catherine said, her expression growing more serious. "To understand something important about me." She gestured for him to sit, taking a place across from him. "Robert, I've spent my entire life navigating the complications of extreme wealth. The Westbrook name opens doors, but it also creates barriers, especially to authentic human connection." Her directness, always one of her most compelling qualities, took on a new dimension in this personal context. "When people learn who I am, they change, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. They either want something from me or resent what I represent. Finding people who see me as simply Catherine, not as a Westbrook or a billionaire, is extraordinarily rare." Rob understood then why she had brought him to her home, not to impress him with her wealth, but to share a genuine piece of herself, to allow him into the private world she carefully protected from public scrutiny. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said simply. Catherine's expression softened. "You've earned that trust in ways you probably don't even realize. From that first day at the factory when you fixed the assembly line without concern for protocol or politics, I saw someone guided by capability and integrity rather than ambition or image." She rose and walked to the mantel, picking up one of the framed photographs. "This is my father," she said, handing it to Rob. The image showed a distinguished man in his 60s standing beside a younger Catherine at what appeared to be a corporate event. He built Westbrook Manufacturing into a global enterprise, but he never forgot its roots as a family business, with responsibility to its workers and community. Rob studied the photograph, noting the resemblance between father and daughter, the same determined eyes, the same poised bearing. "He must be proud of what you're doing to revitalize the company." A shadow crossed Catherine's features. "He's in the late stages of Alzheimer's. He has moments of clarity, but they're increasingly rare. The acquisition and revitalization of Westbrook was partly for him to honor his legacy, while he can still occasionally understand what we're doing." The disclosure revealed a vulnerability. Catherine rarely displayed the personal motivation behind her professional mission. It wasn't simply a business endeavor, but a daughter's tribute to her father's life's work. "I'm sorry," Rob said, the simple words conveying genuine empathy. "That can't be easy to watch." "It isn't," Catherine acknowledged, "but it's given me perspective on what truly matters." She reclaimed the photograph, replacing it carefully on the mantel. "When you strip everything away, the wealth, the position, The influence what remains are the connections we build, the impact we have on others' lives, the integrity with which we live our own. She turned back to him, her expression more open than he'd ever seen it. I brought you here tonight because I wanted you to see me in context, not just as Catherine Hayes, executive director, or even as Catherine Westbrook, heiress and owner, but as simply Catherine, a woman who values authenticity above all else and who has found it, unexpectedly, with you. The directness of her statement, characteristic of her approach to everything, left no room for misinterpretation. This wasn't merely about professional respect or friendly collegiality. It was about deeper connection, about the recognition of something rare and valuable developing between them. Rob crossed the room to where she stood, closing the physical distance that mirrored the emotional space they had been carefully navigating. I see you, Catherine, he said quietly. Not the name or the position or the wealth, just you. The simple declaration seemed to touch something deep within her. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure faltered, revealing the woman beneath the poised exterior, someone who, despite all her advantages, had experienced the same fundamental human longing for genuine connection. That, she whispered, is the rarest gift anyone has ever given me. Rob reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a small, intimate gesture that crossed the careful boundaries they had maintained. Not a gift, he corrected softly, just the truth. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibility. Then, with the decisive directness that characterized her approach to everything, Catherine closed the remaining distance between them and kissed him. Unlike their dance at the gala or the brief moments of contact they had shared before, this was unmistakable in its intent, not a professional courtesy or friendly gesture, but the deliberate action of a woman who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to claim it. Rob responded without hesitation, his arms encircling her waist as he returned the kiss with equal conviction. The connection that had been building between them for months through crisis and triumph. Professional collaboration and personal revelation crystallized in this moment of shared honesty. When they finally separated, Catherine remained close, her usual composed demeanor transformed by a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I've been wanting to do that for quite some time, she admitted. What took you so long? Rob asked, his own smile reflecting the unexpected joy of the moment. Caution, she replied honestly. Fear of complicating an important professional relationship. Uncertainty about whether you could truly accept all that comes with who I am. I'm still figuring that part out, Rob acknowledged, his hands resting lightly at her waist. I can't pretend the differences in our worlds don't exist, or that they won't present challenges. But I do know that what matters most, who you are, not what you have, is something I admire deeply. The honesty of his response seemed to please her more than any glib reassurance could have. That's all I ask, she said, that we navigate those challenges together, with the same directness and trust we've applied to our work. As the evening progressed, they talked more openly than ever before about Catherine's childhood in the rarefied world of industrial wealth, about Rob's military service in the profound loss of Karen, about their hopes and concerns for the future. The carefully maintained professional distance dissolved, replaced by a genuine intimacy built on shared understanding and mutual respect. When Rob finally prepared to leave, Catherine walked him to his car, their hands linked in a simple gesture that somehow symbolized the new territory they had entered, no longer merely colleagues or even friends, but two people committed to exploring whatever lay ahead together. What happens now? Rob asked, reluctant to break the connection between them. Catherine considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. We continue building what we've started both at Westbrook and between us, one day at a time, with honesty and realistic expectations. The practical approach, so typical of her, made Rob smile, even in matters of the heart. Catherine maintained her strategic clarity, yet beneath the methodical exterior, he had glimpsed the depth of feeling she typically kept carefully guarded, a capacity for connection and vulnerability that few were privileged to witness. I can work with that, he agreed, brushing a final kiss against her lips before getting into his car. As he drove home through the quiet autumn night, Rob reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him to this point. From the public humiliation of his firing to the personal triumph of his current position, from the professional partnership with an enigmatic executive to the beginning of something deeper with the remarkable woman behind the corporate facade. The path ahead wouldn't be simple. Their worlds, despite their growing connection, remained fundamentally different. There would be adjustments, compromises, and moments of uncertainty as they navigated the integration of their distinctly separate lives. But as Rob turned onto his own modest street, the contrast with the estate he'd just left didn't discourage him. Rather, it reminded him of what Catherine had said about what truly mattered when everything else was stripped away: the genuine connections we build, the impact we have on others' lives, the integrity with which we live our own. By those measures, the ones that truly counted, he and Catherine were far more aligned than any external differences might suggest. And that alignment, built on shared values rather than shared circumstances, provided a foundation strong enough to bridge whatever gaps remained between their worlds. The future, with all its complexity and promise, awaited them both not as factory director and owner, but as Robert and Catherine, two people who had found in each other something rare and worth pursuing. Regardless of the obstacles that might lie ahead,